I hit go because I was testing. Test 1 2. Test 1 2.
Good afternoon. The time is 4:01. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for February 26, 2024 will please come to order. Let's go around the table and do a roll call introduction, beginning with my right.
Heidi Cater.
Sheila Pryor.
Sheila Fritnowski, Dan Ginestra.
Paris Bende.
Valentina Ears.
Sarah Johansson.
Chase Anderson.
And I am Milind Sahoni. All right, thank you and welcome everyone. On today's agenda, first we have the superintendent's reports, and Dr. Flansburgh will give us the update on the build. Dr. Flansburgh.
Well, good evening, Chair Sahoni, Dr. Anderson, members of the board. I'm excited to join you this evening. And if you recall, last month at our work session, we started talking about some interrelated activities that we're doing and then some structures and systems that we're building around the district operational plan, and specifically the work of our building instructional leadership teams. So I've invited with me this evening 4 of our building principals who will be coming up and joining me in just a few minutes to be able to present. So we have Ashley Farrington, principal of Birchview, Ashley Paul, principal of Plymouth Creek, right across the street, Brad Gustafson over at Greenwood, and Meg Bennett is going to be running a few minutes late because in true style, she's making sure all of the students in her building are actually dismissed at the end of the day from the middle school. And so she'll be sliding in just a couple minutes fashionably late. So as we begin, I want to be able to really remind everybody of why we're doing the DOP and why the BILT are all interconnected. And it starts with our strategic roadmap. Our mission, our vision, our core values define our strategic directions. And it's, if you look at it, when we restructured the roadmap, it was done intentionally so, kind of like that funnel. It leads down to be able to say, what is our core mission? How are we going to get there? As we think about our strategic directions, and newly approved at the start of the school year, there are 3 that are going to be really specific to the work that we're doing with our building instructional leadership teams. Because remember, when we talk about the operational plans, everything should have that interconnectivity. You've seen this one before, the instructional through line. The reason that we keep bringing this back is to be able to say how interconnected everything is. The work of the board sets the conditions for everything else that happens within the district. And that's really important to recognize, because as we talk about the operational plan and why the work that's happening at the buildings is aligned to that and aligned to the strategic directions, it shows the interconnectivity all the way through from the board to the administration, to principals, to teachers, and specifically students. You saw this slide last month as well. And as we talked about examples of planned DOP goals, on here was a building instructional leadership team. You're going to see a little bit more refinement after the presentation now when we talk about the draft DOP later on this evening, and wanted to be able to really connect how that ties into a lot of our building PLC work, our MTSS structures, again, multi-tiered systems of supports. You'll hear that phrase a lot from your chairs that you're sitting in, and recognizing how they're all interconnected. The building instructional leadership team, when we look at the strategic directions it's specifically tied to, it's number 1, 2, and 7. It is going to focus on ensuring a high quality daily experience for each and every student, delivering high quality instruction that leads to high academic achievement for all students, and it aligns the internal district processes and procedures to improve communication, decision-making, accountability, and collaboration, resulting in operational excellence. What is BILT? As you've heard us say before, it stands for Building Instructional Leadership Team. The I is really, really important because it's focusing, it becomes hyper-focused on the instructional components that we're trying to do within the building. It's an aligned leadership team. It has a number of members across all of our sites. When we think about who's involved, there are 6 teachers. They do not need to be specifically saying 1 from kindergarten, 1 from first grade. It's who are the 6 teachers that will be able to help lead our buildings and doing the work to be able to lead specifically the goals that we're trying to accomplish. It also consists of the site principal, the professional development lead, and the site equity lead. The two things that the BILT really oversees with the school growth plans are the student experience and the academic focus. I'm going to go back to the previous slide for just a moment. Again, student experience, ensure a high-quality daily experience for each and every student. And then when we again look at academic focus, deliver high-quality instruction that leads to high academic achievement for all students. We've had lots of conversations already here at the table with many of you to be able to say, what are we doing for the kids who aren't there yet? And this is the work of our BILT. It's not to be able to say we're going to shift and change everything that's already made us really successful. It's how can we become even more focused and intentional on the work that needs to happen at every site, which is different from site to site based on their needs. And that's led up, and that's, you'll again see the interconnectivity, but some shifts and differences from site to site. It's not perfectly aligned, but that's not what alignment means. It doesn't mean we all jump the hurdles at the same time. It's are we headed in the same direction, and where are you on that continuum based on your needs? They also assist in leading the site professional development, which is aligned to the district work. What we don't say is buildings figure out and do whatever you want to do. It's what is our district vision and mission that we're wanting to accomplish, and then how are they personalizing it for their staff? Again, every building could be in different places along the route when it talks about professional development. Why is it important? When we talk about the work of the Center for Educational Leadership, we know the number one lever for student improvement is the classroom teacher. The number two influence on student achievement is the principal. This is about shared leadership. When we take the number one influence and the number two influence and deliberately put them together, we are wanting to maximize our impact on student learning. The BILT background, a little bit previous to what was. When we think about what we were doing previously, prior to 22-23, everybody across the district, all buildings, had a variation of a leadership team. There was limited consistency across those sites, and they varied in their focus areas. Again, operational versus instructional, and you'll hear a little bit about that with some of the principals presenting tonight. Team size, the staff representation could have been very inconsistent from team to team. You'll hear about that a little bit tonight. And the frequency of meeting times. When we're talking about it, you'll see specifically what it is that we're doing differently from what we were doing previous. And again, as we go through this, it doesn't mean that what we were doing before was bad, and it's honoring thy past in the good work that we've done. But as some of you have used the phrase, when you know better, you do better. And so when we think about continuous improvement, as we learn more, we change our practices. And again, the summer data retreat was the focus of our site goals. What is currently? Beginning in the 22-23 school year, last year, all sites implemented a common BILT structure to help lead the work around professional development and their site growth plans. They shifted as a district. We moved away from the summer data retreat to a BILT Institute. This year was really the large BILT Institute where in its new structure, everybody represented on BILT was there. We're talking about common professional development, common expectations, common communications, and then asking those teams to go back to their sites and lead that common work depending on where every site is. Those teams meet twice monthly, and they meet with our district leadership team 3 times per year. So we go out and we visit every single site in the fall, the winter, and the spring to be able to talk about what are their site goals. It's a mid-year check-in, and then an end of the year, where are we at? And it's not, and we've talked about this, feedback loops are not about gotchas. It's about where are we? It's okay to be where you're at, but how are we going to continually improve? What we want to be. We want to really become more intentional and focused on our shared leadership and collective partnership to better those student outcomes. We want to be district aligned, but site driven. And we want ongoing leadership development for teachers and principals. It's also an opportunity for us to be able to build that leadership capacity and not say it's just the principal. Leadership is about the collaborative efforts of teachers and administrators working in partnership. At this time, I'm going to ask Principal Farrington to be able to join us up front, and I'm going to hand off the PowerPoint to him for the next few minutes, and then we'll continue to go through and talk about what's happening at each of our sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you, members of the board. How are you guys doing today? Good, some smiles. So I'm here to first provide perspective on the Birchview BILT team. As Nate alluded to, it's definitely been a transformation even from when I started at Birchview 4 years ago to now. One of the things you saw probably in my first years was more of what I would call like an operational team, and it had to be at the time, because as you remember, I started in 2020 and we were literally thinking about how do we keep our school going every time we met, right? Where we're gonna be distance, where we're gonna be hybrid, where we're gonna go back, and how do we manage and make sure everybody understands what the expectations are. And the transformation happened 2 years ago when we established our now Build and Instructional Leadership Team, which definitely has a more of a focus on instruction. And so making sure the team understands that. The first point, and Nate alluded to this a lot in some of the previous slides, is that the importance of shared leadership. As in a build-in principle, while we can be one, we know that collaboration and shared leadership is the way to get to move the needle. And so building capacity within our teacher leaders is really, really important. As we come up with all our plans, me, the principal, can have my ideas, but really and truly it lives with our teachers and our staff. And so how can we collectively share that responsibility together as a build team versus me or one teacher? It's all of us. And really building the capacity within our leaders to see themselves as teacher leaders within the building, so that when the principal is not around, this is the plan that we all came up with together, and how can we work together, because this plan will help us move forward as a school. Which brings us to our second bullet point, which is around designing, reviewing, sustaining, and carrying out our school growth plan. As you know, each year, we're expected to come up with a school growth plan. And in the past, the school growth plan, I'm gonna be honest, was a plan that's something that we really invested a lot of time in August, and sometimes dusted off in the middle of the year and then at the end of the year, but we weren't using it to the level that I was proud of. And that's been a big shift in our build team. How do we design it, but also review, sustain, and carry it out throughout the year? So our school growth plan is something that we come back to every meeting as a gut check in terms of how are we doing towards some of our goals and our plans that we came up with in the beginning of the year, whether it's on the academic side or the student experience side, which is both really important, right? Because we think about, especially at Birchview, we're thinking about the whole child, and we know that the whole child development is really, really important. So what are the things that we need to do collectively to make sure that success of all of our students? The next bullet point there is infrastructure for continuous improvement. Our favorite phrase at our build is data is used for improvement, not accountability. And really thinking about our team being the charge behind that. How can we continuously improve? Because as we know, in this field, we're always learning, we're always researching, we're always trying to figure out how to best meet the needs of our varying learners. And Build provides us with that. As we go through our growth plan week to week, and we're investigating our data, and we're looking through the lens, from the teacher lens, from all the different departments that are represented there, what do we need to do to make sure we're continuously improving as a team to best meet the needs of our amazing learners that we have at Birchview? The next bullet point brings us down to alignment between school and district. And I put in parentheses, they're connected, but meet the needs of our site, right? While we want to have alignment with our other sites, it's important that we stay true to what's in the front of us. And that can be different than a site. However, we do have our district goals that we want to stay true to, but then how do I tailor it even more to meet the needs of Birchview? And so having both our PD site lead, who is Shelby Schmeyer, one of my fifth grade teachers who is absolutely phenomenal, along with our equity site lead who is meeting at the district level and making sure bringing that information back to us. So as a team, we think, okay, here's our tools, but which of the tools within our box do we actually need for Birchview, right? Because we know we can't do everything on there, which is another thing I wanted to talk about as well, is how can we zone in and focus on what we read right now versus the plethora of things that we can be talking about. Because school improvement does involve us narrowing and zeroing on the things that matter most versus trying to do a million things really well. And that's what I'm really proud of with our team. When we designed our growth plan, we actually carried over the CM goals from last year to this year, and then we identified the action steps that we wanted to get better at versus trying to reproduce a new growth plan, which feels more overwhelming. It's like, how can we continue, because we were doing good work last year, how can we continuously improve and build off what we started last year versus starting from scratch again? Other pieces that I wanted to highlight in terms of Birchview's build team is that importance around instructional planning, preparation, implementation, and analyzation of what we're doing, right? Our team is we meet twice a month on Tuesdays, which is every other week. And in our agenda, we're always coming back to how are we doing in terms of our instruction, how are we preparing, how are we implementing, and how are we analyzing the data to make sure we're doing what we said we're gonna do. And then where do we need to adapt or adjust when we need to? And adapt and adjusting doesn't mean we need to do something different tomorrow, but as a team, we're thinking yearly, 3 years, 5 years? How can we make sure our plan is able to be sustained for a long time? Because we don't want to make knee-jerk reactions right away anytime something feels like it's not going well or something is going really, really well, right? So being patient and watching and really thinking about the steps that we're taking with those things. The other piece is just multiple perspectives to ensure success school-wide. At our team, we do have a representative from every grade, and I'm really proud of that because it provides, while my kindergarten teacher might live in that kindergarten world, it's important to understand the whole scope of the school, not just from the kindergarten lens, but seeing the bigger picture and seeing how this all comes together. And having those variety of voices and variety of perspectives is really, really helpful. One of the things that I'm really proud of, our build members are expected to do a share out 3 times a year where they come back and report to our build team, things that are going well, things that they need help with, and just really cool things that they're doing. And that's like a big time for them to just share with each other. And you should see the room when we're meeting and like, oh, that's a really good idea. I want to try that too. Can we meet separately so I can talk about what this could look like in our grade level or our team? And sometimes that vertical piece is not there where people can have that conversation with a colleague from 3rd grade or 1st grade. And so having that intentionality around that to have those shared conversations. Feedback is very, very important. And our team knows, and they know this, is like, how do we bring the information that we're hearing, whether it's from whatever stakeholder group, bring it to the table so we as a team are constantly looking at that feedback, right? How do we continue to get better? Which goes with our next bullet point, which is around data-driven and solution focus. Like, it's easy to think about our feelings, right? This is going really well because I feel like it's going well, or this is going really bad because I feel like it's going bad, but really using the data to help drive those decisions. And this year, more than ever, our team has been immersed in the data, and the data that I'm most excited about is the data that shows our student growth versus the MCA, our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment data that's just one time, one snapshot. And we've taken a renowned focus around FAST, which allows us to see how kids are growing from fall to winter, and then winter to spring, and then year to year, which I told my team, that's what we want to be looking at. We want to be thinking about our students making that growth, and we're going to use the data then to figure out what the solutions are when we're seeing kids not making those growth. And then success for all students is really, really important. We don't want any student at Birchview to not be a part of that plan. And I hold our team accountable, and our build team hold our schools accountable. How do we ensure success for each and every one of them? Which we can say that out loud, and it sounds really simple, but it's not, right? And thinking about how can we use the collective knowledge within the space to ensure success for all students, right? When we see a certain population within our data, how can we pause and ask ourselves, what is not working for that group? What is not working for that? Why is that not working? What do we need to do different? Even if that's 2 of the 455, we want to tailor it to that 2 of that 455 students that go to Birchview. So the last slide I wanted to show before I pass it on to Ashley is our Birchview experience. And so you'll see this is our 1-page layout of what our plan looks like, and our build constructed this. And you can see both on the student experience and the academics, and we pull this out often. Like, how are we doing towards making kids feel like they matter? How are we doing towards our refocus around reading and making sure students are being met where they're at and growing towards that? Those are our 2 big areas that we're talking about. And in the bottom, which is MTSS, what Nate alluded to, that we are talking about that a lot, and we are too at Birchview. And I put the box around the infrastructure for continuous improvement because those are all the different things that we have in our school that we help us with our improvement, and Built being one of them. We have our Bobcat Pride team, our equity team, our enrichment and intervention, but you see Built at the top because it's an integral part of our continuous improvement cycle in making sure those things that we agreed to and we planned out at the top is happening on a consistent basis. I go to my Build team members a lot and ask them, what are they thinking? What are you thinking? What are you hearing, right? Because again, they're the boots on the ground that we need to help us. And going back to my first bullet point, that shared leadership piece, we need our teachers to be on the same page as our principals, and that's where I see the biggest value from our Built. Brad, not Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it. Hello, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Brad Gustafson. I get to serve at Greenwood. And this reminds me a little bit of the story of the elephant, or maybe it's a proverb where 7 different people describe what an elephant looks like just based on kind of what they're touching and feeling. And it overall, it gives you a holistic picture of the elephant, although I think there'll be a lot more commonality in what we're sharing. I also think you'll get some unique nuances from each site, which is pretty exciting. So from the Greenwood lens and how I see things in particular, I'm going to address first, the first of two slides is kind of past and present. So historically at Greenwood, our leadership team did more of operational work, and it was really good work and it was important work, and I'm proud of the effort that we and the team put in. An example of that might be interpreting how to keep kids safe with regard to winter wear and guidelines around what to wear outside, like critical stuff, not exactly connected to reading gains, but it's a really big deal, especially in an elementary school. Fast forward, and I'm not intending to downplay, I just wanted to give you a picture of things that we would dive into and really fine tune so that there was consistency and not chaos, because chaos doesn't work super well with 800 students and staff who care about them. So fast forward now to a different staircase. This year is where I see our built team doing really inspiring work. Last year was kind of a soft launch where we were rebooting and just trying to figure it out. And I'm just so proud of the difference. I didn't really know what to expect, but the staircase analogy was chosen partly because it connects to the University of Washington and CEL instructional leadership staircase that principals have been trained to kind of use and navigate. But also I see it as our way of continuous improvement on our built team at Greenwood. So an example of what that might look like, and there's lots of different staircases, but one of them that we're just learning how to be on is this PLC work. We've been doing it for many years, but collectively on Built, just through increased focus and learning how to be more fluent, not just in having data, but how to interpret it and make decisions that make a difference for kids from an instructional standpoint, whether that means providing enrichment, differentiation, or a different dose and intensity of instructions, all those things. Like that's a staircase that our Built team has been on. So a little bit of the before and now. I would say the biggest difference is shifting over to an intense focus on instruction as opposed to operations. The second slide I wanted to share, really, if I had to sum it up in one word, it would just be who. Specifically, like who do we want to be? And the benefit I've seen of Built is working in close proximity with a group of leaders, and we're sharpening each other. It's definitely not just me sharpening them, because that probably wouldn't get them to be sharp enough, but it's literally us working together and asking questions and probing and pushing, and we know who we ideally want to be, and then just elevating the conversation and the processes to help us get there for kids. So that's kind of just on the right side, the graphic is how I kind of look at things, and everything flows from who we want to be, and there's some research around that. And on an individual level, I was just doing some light reading, and I found it interesting that for people who compare themselves to their job duty or their job description, okay, you'll get a result, but the result is much more powerful if you're comparing yourself to the ideal. Like ideally, who do you want to be? Especially then when you hone in on and decrease the discrepancy between who you want to be and who you're actually showing up as. So I just thought that was an interesting description, as opposed to giving a team, here's your PLC job duties, have at it, let's work really hard on it. Really focusing on the why, like who do we want to be for kids, and how does that show up in our PLC and Built work? It's just it's an inspired and empowered difference. And then when you collectively show up and do that together twice a month, like our Built team meeting works, it really does. It's just been a really inspiring and humbling process to be a part of. A couple other data points, for lack of a better word, I just wanted to highlight. The second one comes from outside the world of education, but there was a researcher out of Great Britain who started some research, and long story short, they were working with world-class athletes from lots of different countries, lots of different sports, and teams who had the strongest sense of collective identity, outperformed those who had the weaker. And I know it sounds like common sense, but it is good to have research behind who you collectively want to be, and pursuing that, it actually does matter. So that was outside education, and it's good to know there's actually research in education that it's actually one of the most powerful things we can do and B as well. And in our district, we reference the research around Hattie's meta-analyses, and I forget how many studies are encompassed in that, but it's a really significant, or I would say profound result. So collective efficacy, when we think about like how a student did last year, like a lot of times our minds might get stuck on that might be how they're going to do again this year, but BUILT is intended to collectively disrupt that. We have the chance to make a difference. So when we collectively believe that we can make a difference, and then when our actions align with that belief, research will say that is the strongest thing that will change the trajectory of how kids are performing. And that's one thing that BUILT rallies around is we actually can make a difference, and we're going to arrive upon actions and decisions that will influence and disrupt and empower the game, just change the paradigm. I think it's the fourth bullet. I'm losing count here, but collective efficacy is 3 times more predictive than a student's socioeconomic level. And a lot of times when you think about things like generational poverty and just all the things, all the hurdles that kids are having to work against, we get to work with them and having the collective belief and then aligning actions around the belief that what we actually do will make a difference for kids learning has 3 times the effect of a child's level of income at home. I think that's pretty profound. In our district and on our BUILT team, one of our norms is we're not going to alibi. So if you ever hear that, it's just saying we're not going to blame or make an excuse or say why we can't make a difference. You know, we might name something like, this is hard, but then it goes back to who do we want to be when things are hard? We want to be people who work together and figure out solutions that help that student and every single student. And then the last bullet on the bottom is just the actual effect size of collective efficacy and study. I actually think the more recent version of Hattie, he updated it, I think it's at 1.34, but it's still the #1 effect size of all the things in education that were studied. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of them. So that is, in a nutshell, the part of the elephant that I was most excited to talk about tonight. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to tell you about the work of the Plymouth Creek BUILT team. And let's see if I can use this appropriately. Okay. All of the structures that my colleagues have outlined, are in place at Plymouth Creek. It's been a work in progress. Having been a teacher at Plymouth Creek and then moving into the role of principal, it's not something that I was well practiced in either. And so we've all been learning together. This first image just shows kind of what was explained to our staff when we came back to school to help folks just really understand what is the purpose of BUILT at Plymouth Creek and how are they going to influence the work that we're doing together. And so our BUILT team is tasked with monitoring and facilitating PLCs, also specific to our site goals. And our emphasis is really heavy on our ELA standards and the work that Teaching and Learning has done with our unit guides for CCC. This is a framework that was shown at the BUILT Institute this past summer, and it really helped frame up my thinking around how do I access BUILT and leverage BUILT as a tool to meet the needs of our students, and really understanding that the student experience is the thing. It is the reason that we're here, and that is a lever into academic achievement has been really helpful for my own understanding, and then also helpful in and communicating that to the members of our BUILT team. And so our student experience goal at Plymouth Creek is that all students will respond yes to the survey item, in school adults help me feel good about who I am. And that has been really challenging work for our staff and really positive work for our students. And so like Ashley alluded to, we've doubled down on that goal again this year and just wanting to continue to improve. We had a really robust conversation in one of our early BUILT meetings this year around what percentage is going to be our goal. And how did we land on 100%? And we talked a lot about, factors that influence a student's response, and ultimately those are alibis. Our student experience is 100% in the hands of the adults in the building. And so when we're thinking about academic achievement, there certainly are real things that stand in the way of getting that 100%. But when it comes to the student experience, it's us. And so I wanted to make sure it wasn't me telling, and we landed, and we had probably an hour-long conversation about what are we going to set that bar at, and then how do we talk to the rest of the staff about making that attainable. And so ultimately, we are responsible for a guaranteed and viable curriculum, making sure all of our students have access to the standards, but we're not going to get to that if students don't come to school and feel loved and cared for and safe. And so that's been a heavy focus for our build team. Brad just spent a lot of time talking about collective efficacy, so I won't. But that has been that's been some more learning for members of our staff and specifically our build team. It's easy to spend time on the things that make work hard. And there are a lot of them in our profession and certainly in any profession. And when we can name all of those things and then really focus on what is going to move the needle, we have seen the needle move. And so that's been really positive, a really positive shift for us at Plymouth Creek, and being able to see the immediate outcomes of focusing on our collective efficacy has helped us work toward our building goals. Last year, when built, in the 22-23 school year, when we were developing built teams, I had 2 staff members join me at the Built Institute. And one was our interim principal as I was going out on a leave, and one was one of our PE teachers. And so while I was really excited to have their voices at the table, it's really challenging to write building goals that impact student learning with so few people at the table. And as a result, it was increasingly challenging throughout the year to come back to our site plan and have a level of buy-in. Fast forward then to the Built Institute this past summer, we had representation from nearly all grade levels, and it is mind-blowing the shift that has made in our building. When teachers feel like they have a voice, they want to use that voice. Teachers have really embraced the notion of facilitating PLC work through the work of the Built team, and that through line is pretty visible now, having had all of the members of the Built team at the table this summer. And so as a result of that, I've seen leaders in the building. Built has really grown leaders in the building with teachers who didn't see themselves as leaders before. There's been a lot of consistency now in messaging around our building goals because everyone's at the table, everyone's voice was a part of creating those goals, which has led to improved instructional practice. The common language that we've been able to use around our student experience goal, we have a restitution approach at Plymouth Creek, as do many of our elementary schools. And then the common language that comes with both our reading and math curriculum have been really helpful and supportive in us thinking about, as a kindergarten teacher, what impact do I have on our building goals, all the way through as a 5th grade teacher. And so being able to see, again, as Ashley alluded to, that through line of what happens in kindergarten and how it builds. We actually had a built team this afternoon before this meeting, and we did a share out, and everybody can see, like, at this time in the year, what are the skills that are happening at every grade level that are impacting those students as they move through our system. And then finally, our literacy coach has had a huge impact on our student achievement goal. We are focusing on aggressive growth, students making aggressive growth from fall to spring on our AFAST data. And our literacy coach has really helped teachers identify what is the thing that I want to work on as a teacher that our PLC is working on, and how do I put that into action. One way that she's been especially supportive has been making our data visual. And so all teams collect data in different ways, but being able to house it in one spot where you can pull it up and look at it, and colors and sorting and all of the things that has not been a muscle we've exercised a lot at Plymouth Creek. And so our literacy coach has allowed us to really go visual with our data. And so we've seen swift movement with that. We have Meg come up from East.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. Sorry I was late. Our middle school students were still with me, so I wanted to scurry in a little bit late. So good to see you. You will hear a little bit of repetitiveness, which is good, along the alignment of our built teams, but I'm going to be brief in that and try to highlight some different components of our team. When our build team came together, I was new with them this summer, so it gave me an opportunity to really ground us in I call it our 4 pillars of our team and our leadership. We had long conversations about that this summer in the Build Institute. As Ashley said, really arriving to what we want our work to be and really aligning with what Brad talked about of who are we? Like, who are we as a team? And we grounded ourselves in these 4 pillars. That our work is grounded through relationships, that we will be intentional in our work, and we will do our work with innovation and courage. And I am confident that the results that we're getting are 2 things in our leadership. One is the work of our built team and the leadership of our built team. I wouldn't even know how to lead without them. They bring their perspective to me from the teacher lens. The second is our student leadership team. And I think having distributed leadership across both students and teachers, and as a leader, me having the ability to meet with teachers from different grade levels, from different areas of our building, different content matter, and hear from them and our students and our student leadership about their experience from every day. How is this looking? Is this working? What strategies have you tried? Have you taken data? And our team gets the opportunity twice a month to come together and really be intentional and be courageous with one another to lean into hard conversation that is pushing our results. I use this framework frequently across our building, but really dive into it with our built team, and I really believe it holds true that East will be a leading school. And in order to be leading rather than lucky, we need to know what led to our results. And we talk about this frequently, which is what guides us to data-based conversations. As Ashley talked about, we come in oftentimes saying, that felt really good, or I think that went well. And we as a build team look to what data tells us that it was effective or that it did go well. And so we're frequently accessing different data points to ensure that we know what led to the results that we're getting. We've talked a lot about the lucky zone and how we're not going to be in that zone. And that means that we don't really understand how we got the results that we landed with. And so we are very intentional in our action steps, tracking progress to that, and twice a month reviewing that data to indicate, is what we're doing working? And are we seeing the results that we want? If not, we need to be innovative and adjust and iterate until we see the progress that we want to see. These are like the core elements, I feel like, of the success of our built team. And I really believe that the distributed leadership, as I spoke, is critical to ensure that we have a variety of perspectives in the space together to lead our work. Without that, we're going to miss the opportunities and the experiences to reach excellence for each student. I only have a very specific perspective of the student and teacher experience at East. I try very hard, I'm super visible, I'm present, but I'm still not them. And so me being able to get their feedback on how they're doing and how our students doing is really critical. It also allows us to broaden our communication. So it's not just me communicating our vision and our action steps and our professional development, it's us as a team. And there is power in receiving messaging from your colleague. There's power in hearing that this is what we're doing because we believe in it from the person that you team with every day rather than from just me. And so I really think these 3 things of distributed leadership so that we have a variety of perspectives at the table. We're always making sure that we're looking at data and monitoring our progress and iterating our action if we're not seeing the progress that we are desiring. And then lastly, that the colleagues are working together to lead and develop one another to get to that collective efficacy that my colleagues were talking about. And I wouldn't know from an instructional leadership standpoint how to do this alone. And so I really rely on our built team to come together, and they are a strong group of leaders that are having really profound impact on not only the student experience, but our literacy goal at East. Any questions?
Before we hand it over, I just want to add one more comment. My hope with bringing 4 different buildings with 4 different realities and 4 different perspectives is that you were able to see district aligned, but site driven. And that personalization that we talk about earlier is happening in real time at each of their sites. And when we talk about what are some of the most important things that we can do to impact student learning, you know, I'd go so far, and people have heard me say, I'd wager my career on the work of the PLCs and the built work that we do, because I think it's that essential to the outcomes that we want to be able to achieve for each and every. For those areas, when we start talking about the idea of monitoring growth, not just proficiency outcomes, because we can have students who at the start of 4th grade begin their year proficient on 4th grade outcomes. We don't send them home and say, your brain is full, we'll see you next year. We say they still have the ability to have a year's growth in a year's time. For students who are not there yet, they could be multiple grade levels below where they need to be. How are we achieving more than a year's growth in a year's time? That's the focus on aggressive growth. That's more than a year's growth in a year's time. What are we doing to move the needle for individual students to close those gaps that we have? When we talk about identifiable outcomes, we know where those identifiable outcomes are, so what are we doing to respond to them? That's the work of the built at every building, to be responsive to students. And then the built, those are your leaders that go into their PLCs and put it into action. So I thank you for allowing me a couple closing comments, and then we'll open it up for questions that anybody on the board may have for either myself or any of our principal leaders who have joined us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come back up and we'll all take your questions.
Thank you all. Let's start with the comments or questions from my colleagues here.
I have.
Boris, go ahead.
So thank you for that summary, and thank you all for sharing the details. What I like about it is, again, it is aligning with the strategic goals, but it is site-driven, as you said, and it was very clear. And there are specific trends, even though the approaches are different, sort of the method or how to get there is through teamwork, collective efficacy, data-driven decisions and feedback, which is pretty much same across the board. So we are trying to get to the same outcome different ways, completely makes sense. So my question is a little bit broader. And again, if there are examples that you can share now, great. If not, we can work offline. But one thing what I wanted to understand more on the data. So, and I look at data from 2 aspects, right? The inputs to the process, right? So how do you actually collect the data so you know that there are challenges or issues or concerns in those areas? And then when you take an action, how do you actually measure that that outcome is there, right? And it's very easy for me to ask this question, but I understand there are multiple layers, right? No 2 students are the same. Everybody has different needs, and we are talking about all students, right? So how do you go about dissecting that data, whether the data that you are taking as an input, the data that you are analyzing, and then finally when you make improvements and when you look at the outcomes, how do you tie it back saying, yep, we really did, what we were supposed to do?
Anyone want to?
I'll take a try at that. There's so many components that go into it, but I think sometimes where teams can go wrong in that is to try too many things at one time.
Exactly.
And so for us, as our build team, we've just been very intentional on this is what we're trying right now, specific to our literacy goal as an example. And then we'll know when we take data next time, we know that that was the intentional action we took to know if that specific action is making the progress that we want to see. For literacy, as an example, we use multiple data points. Our one consistently is FastBridge A reading, and that gives us more of a, I would say, a flag or like a check-in fall, winter, and spring. So I always say that's kind of like the bigger data point. Then every week we meet in our grade level teams, and that is looking at student data. So that's looking really specifically at how are students performing curricularly in literacy. And we look at that across content areas, not just language arts, to identify, like, are we seeing that from a teacher perspective and in the students learning day to day? And then what does that red flag or that flag that goes up, fall, winter, spring, does that align with the data that we know of the student day in and day out? And so we collect multiple data points, but we're also looking intentionally at our action steps so that we can align if what we're doing is linked to that action. And that is hard because we're working with a lot of students who have complex needs. And so we get this sense of urgency to try all these things at one time. And for me, I find with our build team, I lead them to never lose that sense of urgency, but be very intentional in our action.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense. You have to prioritize and tackle, what the top 3 priorities are, right? So is it fair to assume that, again, even though the goal is or the outcome is what we all are getting towards, the approaches could be different, but let's say the data gathering, data monitoring, is it applicable to all schools the same way, or there are different parameters by building?
At the elementary level, from a curricular standpoint, right, we have the same curricular resources, the same common assessments in terms of our FastBridge, our MCA. Teams are working, PLCs are working to create formative assessments, which are real quick check-in snapshots about how students are performing on a particular goal. And that's designed so that every teacher at that grade level is using that same tool, so that when they come back and they're looking at the data, right, they've used the same tool as a starting point, and then they are calibrating. Lots of times in language arts, the assessment has to do with like a writing, a journal prompt, and so it's not a quick, is this correct or is this incorrect? And so there's a level of calibration that happens with the grade level teachers. They think about what is the goal that we laid out for the students, what's the success criteria that we've told them, and then as a grade level now looking at all these samples, what are the exemplars that we can collect and use for now, but also for in the future.
Okay.
Here's a great example. If you think about a medical situation, when we think about who we're monitoring and recognizing in a district of over 12,000 students, how do we personalize 12,000 students across the system? And then recognizing it depends on the needs of the student. So if I'm a healthy individual, I probably only need to see the doctor 1 time a year to go in, get a checkup, you're doing pretty good, and regular monitoring and being able to say, are we maintaining? Are we continuing to grow and continuing for students to grow at a year's growth in a year's time, no matter where they are on that spectrum? For somebody who might have other medical issues or somebody who might be in the hospital, the doctors are checking in on them far more frequently. The same thing holds true to our students who might be further behind or who may need additional supports academically. We're checking in them with data far more frequently and then monitoring specific instructional strategies. It's not doing 10 different instructional strategies and then saying, I don't know which one worked. Because if you think back to Meg Bennett's lucky versus leading and being able to say, where are we? The most dangerous place to be is to get really phenomenal results and have no clue how you achieved them. So it's really being able to identify what were the specific strategies, which is why I'll go back to Dr. Gustafson's presentation earlier. Brad, when you were doing it, you had ladders, and that's part of the work of CEL. We talk about actionable next steps, focusing on what are we on the verge of getting better at now. And if we can bring a laser-like focus to one thing, master it, get better at it, then move to the next thing, that's what we're doing with students. Same thing with systems and structures, no different with students. What does the student need to master first so they can move on to the next thing? And if we try to do too many things all at one time, nobody's successful.
No, thank you. One last request, on an ongoing basis, if we can bring those sort of, success stories, right? We planned for this outcome, we achieved it. I think that would be great to know. And at the same time, lesson learned, right? Because we will run into challenges and hiccups. So not every strategy is going to plan out the way we think. I think it will be a good exercise for board members as well as community to understand, and we can kind of, tell those stories, if you will. So if you can, that would be really helpful.
Thus the reason it's attached to an operational plan, which you'll see in just a little bit.
Right. Thank you.
Hey, Meland. Hi. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for being here. So my question is pretty, I don't know, something you can take as much time on it really as you like. And first off, just to ask Ms. Paul, how many students do you have at Plymouth Creek?
656.
Okay, so then, the three of you elementary school teachers and I guess kind of having the kind of both sides of the spectrum, Mr. Farrington, who's, the smallest, at least, and then Mr. Gustafson, I think you're more toward the, the higher end. And then Ms. Paul, who's kind of in that middle. It's not really, you could take it as a question, you could take it as an opportunity to just kind of reflect on, how do you deal with the, just the differences in, population and kind of just along that spectrum.
I think Built allows us to do that. I think one of the things that's super important is having that teacher leadership on the team to be able to think about, at least in our case, it keeps us focused on the kids in the front of us, and it keeps us focused on what can we do to support those kids. One thing I wanted to add from your question is what we call is the levels of data, right? We have that satellite data, that's that top end data that only comes one time a year. We call that MCAs. We have our map level data that comes more frequently, right? And that's probably like our flag test that Meg talked about. And then we have that street level data that where our teachers are doing the observations they're doing daily, the weekly assessments and all that stuff. So to answer your question, Dan, is putting all those things together, no matter how big your building is or small it is, and really trying to bring those combination of those 3 data points and thinking about how do we make, almost like that surgical, now I'm going to the medical, how do we make surgical moves to support each kid in our building, right? And talking to that collective efficacy, these are our kids, not just Mr. Farrington's kids or Miss Paul's kids. We all own the kids in our building together.
Thank you. Thank you. This is so exciting to hear. And one of the things that I thought was the most exciting is your candidness and reflection on the evolution of the Built team, right? And your statements around the things that we were doing, right? And we were doing the best we could with what we had, and then we've had our time, and then we're moving forward. Whereas we are always sort of thinking about, like, how do you see this growing more? Like, as we think about next year and the coming years, like, where are the opportunities to level, right? And to really embrace the things that you're doing really well. And then also, how is this growing and evolving moving forward?
Hey, thanks for that great question. So one thing that comes to mind, and this is straight out of collective efficacy research, it's actually taking time to celebrate the practices and the data that we do have success with, instead of speedboating and not being reflective and kind of collectively owning and elevating the capacity or the consistency of that practice that's happening. So our team, and I do believe it's happening at most, if not all, Built meetings, Nate could attest to this better than I could, but just sharing what is working and how do you know, and then having lots of ahas and follow-up questions so that people can replicate those. So that's one thing I'm trying to be intentional with. And then, Dan, I was thinking about what you asked earlier relative to school size, and one thing that came to mind, and I've been on quite a few MDE webinars in my career, and regrettably, I don't always walk away like fist pumping thinking, God, that was good, and I'm not, that's more of a reflection on me. But what I will say, I was in one, and I have not stopped talking about it in more than a year now. And it was part of the MTSS work the state is helping us lead. And the facilitator said something to the effect of, pockets of excellence will not ensure each and every student is successful. Systems will. So when you asked that question, I was very proud to work in a district that is implementing a system that's part of MTSS called Built, that is helping to elevate our consistency and capacity to respond to the needs of each and every child, really with regard to school size, but also regardless of school size.
Continuous improvement. I think Brad alluded to it. I think we have to pause and celebrate our success. And we put 5 minutes at the beginning of every Built meeting to do that. And I expect our teams, our PLCs to do the same thing. Before we get into all the work, let's pause and celebrate. And we know that there's always opportunities to grow. And I think for me, I'm most excited. I think from last year to this year, you saw a lot of positive change. And I think that shared ownership piece is more loud than it was last year. And I'm excited to see how that continues to grow. We had an example, a more concrete example. We had a PD day in January, and I probably only had 10 minutes of the delivery of the content. That felt really good. The build team led the content. And so when you talk about growth, my hope is that from year to year, obviously the principal will need to be part of that, but I can take a step back and let them lead the work and be part of the learning with them versus the principal always being the one in the front of the room to lead the work. Because shared leadership, doesn't matter who it is, we own it so well that any of us can stand up here and talk about it and talk about how we got there and talk about what we need to do next, not just the principal. And I think that's the next step that I'm most excited about.
Sarah, you had asked what's next. And I think as you look at the evolution and growth of teams in general, I'll go back to somebody who may be a brand new principal in their first year compared to their fourth year. In your fourth year, all of a sudden you look around and you go, I now know what I didn't know because I have more information, I have more experience, I've lived through the process. And watching teams grow, I think sometimes we get so excited about what's next. What's the next new shiny fancy thing that we're going to implement right away? We have to implement the next new thing. Sometimes it's allowing the teams the time to be able to say, let's become really excellent at what we're doing and allow the team to evolve and grow and get better so that they can continue to know how to refine their own practices to lead their colleagues within the building. It isn't how much new can we keep adding to the system. It's how excellent can we be and who are we on the few things we might say, this is what we're hanging our hat on, and this is who we're going to become. So I would see in the next couple of years, the builts continuing to refine, become more intentional and focused in particular around data. So when we think of where we were a year ago to where we are now, the idea of we've moved from proficiency to growth and proficiency, and then being able to say, what does it look like for aggressive growth? And then being able to continue to dive down and drill down into even more refined data and those conversations to get even better yet. And going back to the surgical methodology, it's trying to really be intentional about being that precise surgical moments with kids. And that's where builds will continue to evolve and get better as they continue to have practice.
So can I make one more quick comment?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is in line with sharing a mistake. I think you were asking for one of those earlier. So I was sitting back here reflecting, who do I want to be? And it's not someone who doesn't elevate others. So when I was mentioning about MDE, I think I could have done that way differently and better.
I thought you did fine.
Okay, well, I think showing up to webinars is hard, and they do a really great job, and they work hard to support us. So I apologize for how that probably came out. So thank you. There's a mistake you maybe don't need to talk about, but
We've all sat in webinars. We know it's like, nobody looks forward to a day when all learning is online. It's learning those, where is that sweet spot? So
Dr. Gustafson, this is all recorded, so.
You're good. Other questions?
Valentina? I was just kidding again, okay, just like you were. So I was just...
My question will depend on first answer. Goals. How many goals per building do you have? 2. I would like to hear your building goals, if you can, please. And what are your unique needs of your building? Since you're saying you are dealing with different population, different needs, it would be nice to hear what are they. Thank you.
I can share mine quickly. So our academic goal is around literacy. We want at least 75% of our students to show typical or aggressive growth using the FastBridge A-Reading as our literacy marker or progress monitoring tool. And then our second goal is around the student experience. And we chose 4 questions from the district student engagement survey to be our focal data points around the student experience. The one is that students have learning that builds community and connection with their peers. The second and third question are around that they know that their community of friends and that they have adults that they matter to and that they know that they care at school. And so our 4 questions that we rely on for the student experience are all around that they know that they matter. And that their adults and their peers demonstrate to them, and that their learning allows collaborative experience, because we believe in middle school that collaboration is critical and that you feel safe around your peers in order to take risks in learning. So those are our 2 goals at East. And then I think you had a second part to your question.
Unique needs.
Oh, yes, thank you. So for us, right now, we're diving deep into how middle school students know that they matter to adults. And that is, I think, unique to middle school. And I met with our student leadership today and our team, and we're diving into what does that look like for a middle school student to know that an adult shows that they care and that they genuinely matter. And that's complex in a middle school developmentally, especially because in just meeting with my students today, that answer is very different from a 6th grader to an 8th grader. And so that is a complexity that we're navigating for the student experience. And then with literacy, our student population is more complex this year and more diverse than prior years. And so we're really leaning into culturally responsive instructional strategies as a building, so that we can identify that the strategies that we're implementing specific to literacy are responsive to the cultures of each of our students.
Ours sound somewhat similar. So we have 2 goals. One is a student experience goal, and it's based off the student engagement survey. And it is increasing the percentage of kids who respond to one question at Greenwood in particular, and it's, my teacher helps me, and I won't get the wording perfect, but understand how to get better or how to learn. So essentially that tier 1 instruction that actually makes a difference, and that kids say, I am here, and the person helping me learn actually helps me. Our built team had a in-depth conversation. There's some intention behind that goal, and it was also placing the emphasis on tier 1 instruction and having kids be in the room as much as possible and appropriate. So it was kind of a dual purpose goal. And when I say that, I'll just put, here's another mistake. Why I'm this, now I know why I'm here. So reflecting on past experiences, sometimes as a principal, when you go to help a student process, something that they're working on from recess, for example, sometimes the schedule gets a little tight, and if you have a pocket of time, you're going to go try to help them. Well, if I'm pulling a student from a core reading lesson that they really need, that's not super helpful to them. So it's an all hands on deck thing, and the built conversation in this goal in particular has just kind of elevated our collective efficacy and commitment to have kids receive tier 1 instruction because we believe it's helpful and that they need it, but it's connected to that simple goal. And then the second goal connected to student achievement is very similar to Meg's, and it's increasing. So it's looking at students who started the year scoring on the FAST Bridge in the at-risk and some risk area, and increasing the percentage of kids who are scoring aggressive growth or earning aggressive growth. And then there's another, what's the next? I thought there was one above typical, but modest. Yeah, I think modest might be above it, but having them get more than typical. So obviously if you're scoring in some risk or high risk, we don't just want typical growth, because then you're always going to be the year behind. So those are our 2 goals.
At Plymouth Creek, our academic goal is the same as what Brad described. In fact, I think it's the same for all of our elementary schools, is increasing the type of growth and the number of students who make above typical growth from their fall A reading score. I outlined our student experience goal a little bit in my presentation. 100% of students will respond yes to the survey item, in school, adults help me feel good about who I am. When I'm thinking about unique populations, we've spent a lot of time as a staff talking about how do we help students understand those words, specifically our younger students. And so we've done a lot of work as a built team, and I also with our special services team and our dean around creating common language specific to that goal. What does it mean to feel good about who I am? And at first I have to understand myself. So we've done work around our basic needs. And how do we identify those and meet our basic needs in ways that are healthy and appropriate for our community? And then shifting to, for adults to help me feel good about who I am, that means the adults need to understand how I best meet my needs when I'm at school, and how I learn best. And so from the staff side of things, we focused a lot on our engagement strategies, the cultural responsive strategies that Meg Bennett talked about, because as educators, we've been in school our whole lives, and generally we will lean to a more traditional approach to providing instruction. And we know that not all of our students learn best sitting, receiving, watching. We have students that need to do, we have students that need to move, we have students that need to be in close proximity with one another, and we have to be really intentional about providing learning in ways that meet the needs of all of our students. And so that has looked like taking inventories, teachers taking inventories of their class or of their day. How am I providing instruction most often? And then looking at my class list and thinking about how students need to receive instruction to learn best, and how do I align those two things so that we're meeting the needs of all of our students.
I really like your question because it feels like we're in a built, because as I hear from my colleagues, we can see so many similarities and just a few slight differences that we can learn from each other. And so just like all three of them mentioned, we have an academic goal and we have a student experience goal. On the student experience side at Birchview, we're focused around in-school adults help us feel really good about who we are. And very similar to what Ashley shared, we're doing very similar things, really asking our kids and teaching them, what does it mean to feel good about ourselves? And in fact, it's a goal that we continued from last year. And last year, we have 3 categories, yes, sometimes, and no. And our goal was to decrease the amount of no's. So we had 97% of students at Birchview saying yes and sometimes. So our build team said, let's dive even deeper. We want to think about how we increases the yes so that we can limit the number of sometimes and no's. So that's this year has been our focus. And in combination of our district survey, we also interview our kids 3 times a year to ask them exactly that so that we can come up with plans to help support them with that. And then on the academic side, very similarly, it's around literacy and increasing the kids who are making that aggressive and typical growth. Because as Nate alluded to earlier, typical growth is a year's, aggressive is more than a year. And definitely those students who are not there yet, we're really thinking about what we can do to get them there so we can build on that. And so at our school, we're really honing in on culturally responsive practices as well. As we know, Birchview is a very diverse school with a variety of learners, which we are proud of. And so how do we meet those learners where they are and make sure they are learning in a mode that works best for them? That's been really successful. Another part of that is we've put an emphasis, on our small group instruction. That's happening across the board in K-5. Walking through a 5th grade classroom last week for the first time, and like our 5th grade teachers, typically you see teacher and kids in the front of you, and eventually they do some independent work. But our 5th grade is now doing tons of small group instruction with the kids that we're talking about with the high and summer, really trying to zero in how can I help move these kids farther. And then on the opposite end, right, with the kids who already who know it, how do we also make sure those students are making flat or modest growth and making sure our plans are also allowing them to move forward as well? And so as you heard from all 4 of us, is that academic focus and that student experience focus. We lead with our student experience because I believe that kids need to feel really good about school before they can do good. And so that's how we approach it at Birchview.
I'd like to add one more piece because as you were saying, you're really proud. It reminded me, for those board members who have been on the board for the last year to 2 years, you've heard us talk about the CEL research when they went around the Center for Educational Leadership out of the University of Washington, when they did their research and they asked kids, what do you want to experience when you go to school? What is it that, as a student, what do you want? They were able to take thousands and thousands of responses from all over the United States and narrow it down to 2 words: happy and proud, if you remember those phrases from earlier. Happy means I have a sense of belonging in school. I know that when I enter a building, this is where I belong. Proud was academic success. They want to become successful in what they're doing in their work. They don't want to come and not feel that way. So we took that happy and that proud, we shifted that to the language that we use across the district. That's the belonging and success. That leads into our student experience and our academic outcomes. Those are our focus areas, which also is exactly what kids are looking for.
Thank you. Yes, Heidi.
So I have 2 questions actually and a comment. I want to build on what Valentina asked. So even though, as we're thinking about systems and talking about improving our system as a whole, even though your goals may look very similar and they sound very similar, do you feel that it is important for each individual school to individualize as you've done?
We ask each of our grade levels to think about what is our building goal and then to develop a goal that is specific to the students at their grade level. So one example, our kindergarten teachers, their goal to help kids make aggressive growth is to make sure that they know all of their letters by January. That's not the same goal that a fifth grade teacher is setting, but we can see on paper and in practice through our built meetings how all of those goals are aligned to our larger district goal. And then we break down the action steps. So how are we going to make sure that kids receive the instruction and what they need to meet each of those individual goals? So I believe all of those action steps are very.
Thank you.
I would share the same. We do the exact same thing where we have our building goal and then each grade level team makes their action plan specific to what they believe they need to do to meet that goal. But I hope that our action plan looks different every year because that means we're being responsive to the students in front of us. And so I hope that our actions, we're learning about those effective strategies that we can continue to use and pull from, but that we are continuing to be responsive to the students in front of us. So I think it's really important. I mean, we have a lot of alignment, but then there are going to be little pieces, I think, on how we reach success in our building that has to be specific to the students primarily and then the staff that we're working with as well.
Thank you. Okay, I have another question. I'm hearing a lot about data and data-driven decisions, and it's very exciting for me because I nerd out on this stuff too. But my question is this. You can base your decisions in data, right? And you can also have intuition, and you can have educational expertise, and that comes with a certain sense of intuition. How are you making sure that teachers and their intuition are also part of that decision-making process?
This is my favorite question because I don't tend to nerd out on data. I tend to lead with what's happening in my heart. And teachers lead with intuition, whether we want them to or not. And so we can enter, am I wrong? And so we can enter into a space and say, here's the agenda and here's the data. And they're always going to say, I feel, I know, and this is what my kids need. And so that's just naturally infused in every conversation. When we're looking at data, we're always asking ourselves, does this match what you see and experience in the classroom?
I also think that's another critical element of a built team. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of my role within the team is that I'm facilitating the team to make database decisions, but also using their intuition at the same time. And that is a challenging balance at times. I will say teachers really drive a lot with their intuition. But they're also very data driven and they're figuring that out. And I feel that that's my role in the build team is to help them develop in their ability to utilize data that the best they can. I also think it's something as a building we're learning about, what is data? What is included in that word? What does that mean? And sometimes it feels like there's so much data coming at us, it's hard to organize around. And then honestly, other times it's where's the data? And so we're always trying to balance what we're using to make those database decisions, that we have multiple data points in order to lead us in a specific direction. But we're also using our own professional judgment in what our gut is telling us is in the best interest of that student. And it's balancing those two things.
The words that come to mind for me is gut check, right? And how do you balance, right? Because Ashley said it best in this year too, I'm starting to learn data more, but how do we balance what we feel and what the data actually says, right? And I use the word gut checks a lot, especially with our FAST data, when it only happens fall, winter, and spring. It's hard to get too high or too low about something that only happens 3 times a year. So what else can we use to balance out some of that, right? Some of your feelings and things, how is that matching what you're seeing on a daily basis? Because that's important too, right? And our teachers are very skilled, and the art is where, at least for the Birchview teachers, they're really good at knowing their kids really, really well. So what's the line in the middle that makes us balance that?
And just a quick addition, this reminds me of a PLC conversation that a team might have, or even a built conversation. So I think about who I want to be. I think I want to be a person who doesn't put intuition and expertise up against data and saying that you have to choose one. I think the two can coexist in a really beautiful way if you approach it correctly. So, or not correctly might not be the right word, but if you just approach it with that mindset. So it just makes me think about So you want to try something new, or what are you thinking? And then sounds awesome. Let us know how it goes and how you know how it went, based on data. So that's more of a learner-driven, data-informed approach. So maybe the learner is coming first, and then you're just looking at the data.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I have one more comment to make, because in the spirit of you all saying that Built also celebrates, some of the things that I heard were that data is allowing for differentiation, that you're allowing teachers to have leading voices in instruction, which is really important, aggressive growth. Built is a strong avenue for teacher input and feedback for school leadership. And the biggest thing for me is that I heard you as leaders being so inspired. And I think it's so important for our students and our teachers to feel that inspiration when they're walking into the doors. So thank you for the work that you're doing to really bring to life our equity commitment. You're all in. Yeah.
100%. First of all, I want to thank you all for the people. Oh, you want to ask one more?
Hearing about data, I would like to hear one more thing. To be honest, I think it's more will be for elementary, since it's about third graders. I've seen statistics data that third graders, to be honest, are not doing very well. I'm curious, what is your plan? Because obviously COVID and all, they were not able to learn normal way. So I suspect that's what worked out in the results we got.
Yeah, I think it's a global issue, right, across the country. And how do we get our third graders to grade level, right? And I think it's a collective commitment. And one of the things that I think about at Birchview, a lot of the things we outline here today, right, really understanding MTSS work, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. When we see kids making that flat or modest growth, that tells us that they're not if they have a risk level either of high risk or some risk, that tells us they're at risk of not being at grade level at the end of the year. So we need to respond to that. And so our teams are thinking about, how do we respond to this? How do we get that? So a student who may be of any of those categories may have more time with the teacher. Like Nate said, that means like when you go to surgery and you have some things pop up, then you may get more teacher time so that the teacher is really monitoring and helping you. One of the favorite quotes that I saw last year in June, a group of elementary principals, teachers, I think we had more than 100 people go to the PLC Institute in Minneapolis. And one of the quotes that was said continuously, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results, but getting the same thing. And so when we see trends that shows our kids continuing to make this stagnant growth, then we need to do something different about it. And that's where our PLCs come into place. Our grade level teams, along with our interventionists, our literacy coaches, which I want to say they're doing a phenomenal job meeting with our teachers on an individual basis, thinking about what can they do to shift instruction to help kids continue to grow. Last but not least, I want to talk about the whole aspect of community of readers. At Birchview, we've really taken a step back to be like, how can we intrinsically motivate students to want to read, right? In 2024, when we have iPads, movies, TVs, we're immersed in so many distractions. We still know that the power of reading is very, very important. So as a school, we take every opportunity to be like, we're gonna celebrate this. It's exciting to pick up a book. We're gonna do different challenges and parents have given us feedback how that hurdle at home feels better for them because kids want to read. Because we all know when we read every day, we get better at reading. And that is part of the issue that we're trying to manage too. How do we develop a community that really, really, really puts reading as an importance? Because we know when we read more, we do better.
I'll just add, we know that our third graders had limited access to instruction in the years that they were learning to read, right? And so learning to read shifts to reading to learn. And so we've really had to own as school staff that our intermediate teachers really have to spend time on some of those foundations of reading. And that's not a muscle that they've had to exercise previously. And so we've had to really spend some time with our literacy coach and our intervention staff and having our K-1 teachers really support our 3, 4, 5 teachers on understanding how to teach kids to learn how to read, because that's not typically been something they've had to do, and realizing that the onus is on us and not on the kids. And so we can say they can't, this is hard for them. And so What are we going to do about it? Well, we've needed to increase the capacity for our intermediate teachers to teach the foundations of reading to our students.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to make a comment on what Director Bende said earlier about this thing not happening overnight or in a day. As they say, Rome was not built in one day, right? So this is going to take time, and as long as the effort is intentional, I think it will succeed. I have two questions. One is, if you go back, I don't remember the slide number, the one with the staircase. In the past, it was operational, and now it is instructional. There was a triangle there. What does that signify?
Yeah, that was a hat tip to training that we've had through the University of Washington and the CEL. And the intent is to look for incremental improvements instead of looking to go from 0 to a billion. What is your next best step? Like, what can you do from an asset framing standpoint? And what are you on the verge of? So in built case, we are doing norms really well at Greenwood, norms that actually are connected to student learning before the meeting and after the meeting. So then what are we on the verge of? So that triangle would represent the next behavior, maybe the taking our fluency with data, the next step. There's different staircases, but it just represented taking that next step.
I knew there was not a mistake there, right? It was intentional. The second question is related to leadership. I think one of you, probably Principal Bennett, talked about teachers learning to lead, being on the build team. So the first question is are all the teams led by the principals, or are the teachers a leader in that team in any of the schools? Number two, you talked about learning understanding perspectives from everybody, including students. Has the Built Institute recommended having students on the team? A leader, students that are kind of show leadership qualities, basically.
So let's start with question number 2. Is there a recommendation to be able to have students on the team? No, this really is intentional. And the reason why, we're looking at student data. And that's private data. And what we don't want is unintentionally to be able to put kids into a position where they're looking at confidential information that teams are looking at to dissect, to talk about what they're going to do instructionally to make sure that students are better and learning at higher rates. There are times and places where student voice is absolutely appropriate, and many individuals will have they'll have principal councils, or they'll have teams that they will bring students in to be able to have their student voice recognized within the building. Unfortunately, this group of students is not that place. And then I have to go back and, yeah.
And to add to what Nate said, this is a nuanced kind of understanding of data, but we should probably make it really clear. When we're talking about kids, we're not labeling them as at risk or some risk. What we're doing is talking about a score and the range of score that they earned. So I could only imagine a student sitting in the room would not be able to pick up on that nuance and be, they might think a classmate is that. But also it's important that as adults, that's not how we talk about kids. This is what their score was. They are human beings that we're loving and teaching.
Although we talk data and numbers, students aren't data and numbers. We recognize the uniqueness, and when we talk about whole child, and it goes back to, well, how do you know? What do you do? It's trust and verify. So we trust the gut of individuals within the teams, but then verify that data. And if something isn't working, we need to be responsive to what's not working and change our instructional approach. And then, Milind, I can't remember your first question.
Can I just respond quickly to your comment on that? So you talked about gut check, not just relying on data. So in my mind, I'm thinking student leaders or students that are very close to other students have a qualitative knowledge of how the other students are doing. Not the data. They may not know anything about the data, but some kind of qualitative feedback is what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm way off target, but
yeah, I think for this topic, it would be a different avenue and a different venue for a feedback loop for students. Which feedback loops? There are feedback loops, and I can defer to any of the principals to speak to that. But as it pertains to, I really want to be very clear with the building instructional leadership team, this would not be an appropriate place.
Okay. And the first question was about leadership.
Oh, the teacher development.
Whether any of the teachers are the leader of that specific team.
Well, the one constant year after year after year on that team will always be the principal. Teachers can roll off. So once that you're on a built team, you're not a built member for life. It can be something that different individuals will be able to do, but it's also a way that we can develop leaders within the system to be able to bring that alignment throughout. So when we talk about shared leadership, the principal is probably always going to be the facilitator of the meeting, but they in and of themselves do not dictate the entire meeting. That's the shared leadership conversation.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for all the efforts. And I know this took much longer than we had anticipated, but this is absolutely very critical information and very important. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to sit or stand? Keep standing. You've been sitting for a while. Sure.
Are you ready for us to launch?
Okay,
all right.
go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for giving us an opportunity here tonight to speak to you a little bit about the development of our strategic directions and our district operational plan. Before I do that, I just wanted to acknowledge two people in the room here with us. To acknowledge Dee Dee Caring, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations. This is her last official school board meeting, if my records serve me well. Is that correct? Dee Dee, thank you for your service. We mentioned that at the last board meeting, but we've appreciated all that you've done for us over the last several years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And behind me is our next Executive Director of Finance and Operations, Scott Lesage, currently our Director of Finance. He'll assume the official duties for that next Monday. Dee Dee's final day will be this Friday, so we'll have a seamless transition into somebody who's been with us. Scott's worked with us for about 1.5 years at this point, and is ready to step into that new role. So since they were both here, I just wanted to acknowledge them and thank them both and wish both well in their new chapters. So thank you. With that, we'll move on to the next topic on the agenda. And as Milland indicated, the first segment took a little bit longer than maybe we anticipated. We might be able to make up a little bit of ground on this one, but we don't want to rush it. But in the same token, we're probably not going to get to the level of detail that the principals were able to bring. So I think it was really great that you had that opportunity to hear their experiences, their work in implementing and working with their building instructional leadership teams with great leadership from Nate. He's done a wonderful job of teaching our principals, working with our principals, helping them design the appropriate building approaches to really focus on that instructional component within the school, continuous improvement of student learning, and also enhancing and developing that student experience. One of the things I think you're going to find with this presentation, there's going to be a lot of interlocking and overlap and interconnectivity between what you heard from the principals in that previous presentation and what you're going to see with this. Oftentimes you kind of start general and then drill down to specific. We kind of started specific and now we'll umbrella out, so to speak, to a little more general perspective. So just to give a little bit of history about our strategic roadmap. So the school board, working with leadership team, developed their first strategic roadmap and approved it back in 2011. That was since updated in 2015 and 2019, and then most recently last September in 2023. So we have the 4th generation strategic roadmap, and a copy of that was in the PowerPoint that Nate shared in his introductory comments with the last presentation. So it's fully equipped with a mission statement, which was totally written and redone back in 2010-11, leading up to its approval, which really breaks into 3 main component parts, which focuses on, I don't know, what can be called the products and services of our district. So that would be our curriculum, our student services, all of the deliverables that we bring forward as a team of educators within the district. We have operations, and we have customers. So just like any enterprise or organization, I think almost without exception, you'll find that those 3 main component parts are an essential and an important part of a school district or any type of an organization. So we've been working on the development. Primarily what we're looking at tonight is, so I mentioned the mission vision. We also have core values and 7 relatively newer strategic directions, which reflect the previous 4 strategic directions, but have expanded a little bit. And that's where we're primarily going to bring our focus here tonight. So I'll give a little bit of process background, and then I think Nate's going to kind of go through quickly the 7 strategic directions. What you're going to find is there's a lot of specificity for one of them, and that really ties into what you just heard about. It's that instructional piece. And we had a little bit of a head start with that one because Nate has been working with the principals on that for a couple of years already. And for that reason, it was, I won't say it was easy, but maybe easier to kind of infuse that within the framework of this developing district operational plan. So in the coming months, we had shared with you before that this year would be kind of that development of the district operational plan, kind of building the plane, so to speak, as it's flying. It's probably not the greatest metaphor, but it's one that you hear periodically. It's kind of true, I guess, is that we have to continue doing our work, our daily standard work, and all of the type of work that finds us, while at the same time developing our longer range strategic and focused work that will help us meet those vision objectives of continuous improvement and delivering high quality curriculum and programming to our students. So thus far, the development up to this point, you're going to notice some of them don't have detail in it. Doesn't mean we haven't done anything with it. Just means it wasn't ready in good form to package in this particular document for today's purposes. Like, you'll see on a couple of them that Nate will talk a little bit more in detail with. But again, I think you're going to see some reflections of what you heard from the principals in the previous presentation. At this point, as you'll recall, we've had some board engagement to collect themes around some of the information that was collected, which really helped us develop those 7 strategic directions. We've done some work with Dan Hooverman and the development of not only the whole concepts of governance and management, but also what are some of the strategic focus areas that the school board would like to work on. And again, I think what you're going to find is that these are continuing to develop and evolve. We've worked within our strategy leadership team with all of our directors and executive directors to really try to bring some detail to each one of these 7 strategic directions. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Nate and just ask if he would be willing to kind of work through the 7 strategic directions and share a few thoughts. I'll maybe add a few comments along the way, but I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, going back to Paris, you had a question earlier, and you're like, how can we get some of this information that we just talked about on a more regular basis, especially as it pertains to some of the student outcomes? You're going to see where that ties in directly to our 2nd strategic direction. And then as we think about the operational plan, what does that mean for accountability? And what does that mean for the board's involvement in that level of work? So obviously, when we go back to that through line of instructional leadership, the board's job is to ensure that you have set the conditions for the success of the system. And we as a system and the administration are accountable to be able to do our work in alignment to meet the needs of our strategic directions. When we think of those 7 strategic directions, a lot of times, and we talked about this last month, what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative? And sometimes there are quantitative measures, and sometimes there are qualitative measures that we need to be able to go through. And you'll see that as we begin to develop this over the next number of months. So this really is draft iteration 1. And over the next number of months, we're going to keep coming back, and you'll see multiple refinements. And you'll have opportunities for feedback for us, whether it's here or offline. It's that opportunity to be able to look at and say, what are we doing? Because the idea behind this work is to meet the desired outcomes of those strategic directions. And if we think of those as kind of our 5-year plan, what are we doing annually to be able to meet this work? So when you look at an operational plan, this is the next 12 months work. You will not see it, even though sometimes the work might be 2, 3, or 4 years worth of work. This plan will focus on the next 12 months. And when we think about this operational plan, this would go into effect for next school year and the work that's being engaged over the next 12 months, starting with next school year. So the first one, when you think of that, ensure a high quality daily experience for each and every student. When you look at the rationale, why is this important? If equity is at the core of all we do in Wayzata, and if you think of our core values, equity, meeting the needs of each and every student. What are we doing to meet the needs of each and every student? A student's success in our district will not be predicted by their socioeconomic status, race, or whether they have been identified as having a disability or are a member of any other protected class. We want to be able to, over the course of the next year, really define and articulate a high-quality student experience in Wayzata schools. So there's other components. You're seeing what the goal is. You're noticing the strategies, the performance indicators, and time frame are not filled in. Intentionally so, because right now that's the work of strategy leadership team, and we are continuing to refine that. And as we develop that, we will bring it back to you to be able to say, here's what we're looking at and thinking about, and then you'll have opportunities for the feedback loops as part of that process. Goal 2, improve the overall student experience at all levels, preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, and the transition program. Well, you got to already hear how that's being implemented in a number of our schools. That is one of our goals for every building, the student experience goal. So it goes back to district alignment. When we're talking about we're system aligned, it's the expectation that they're working on the student experience. And then they personalize it. It's site driven because it might look different at every site. Because every site, students might respond differently. You heard about some of the survey questions. Every building might have different responses. And so how are they approaching those different responses based on the student feedback loops that, Milind, I think you had mentioned earlier. Where's the student voice in it? Well, we do surveys. We ask kids questions. How are you doing? How is your experience? At the high school, students are constantly being asked feedback loops as part of their overall course experience. So there's constantly those feedback loops to be able to say, how am I doing? What do we need to do differently? When you scroll down to number 2, here's where we're going to spend a little bit more time tonight. And you got to see an in-depth. The reason that we led with BUILT really was intentional because it ties in really intentionally to the second strategic direction. Although if you recall, it actually hits on 3 strategic directions, the BUILT team. You're going to see it embedded into this goal. It's not a standalone goal in and of itself, but it's part of a broader goal. And so when you think about the rationale, students learn best in an environment where there is there are organized academic activities and programs caring and deeply empathetic adults and streamlined operations. So our goal is to implement an MTSS system. And if you recall, MTSS, the beautiful acronyms that we all live in education, multi-tiered system of supports, to reduce disparities in academic outcomes. You've heard me use that word countless times, disparities in academic outcomes. I tend to, and really I don't buy into the word gap, because you will always have gaps. You set the system up for failure by saying we're going to eliminate gaps. That means everybody's the 99th percentile. So when you think about gaps, we think about disparities. Who's not there yet? Who's already achieving at the levels or above the levels we want them to be at? Who do we need to focus on? How are we measuring that? Multiple assessments. This is not all-encompassing. But for the purpose of the board, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, the MCAs, the Formative Assessment System for Teachers, the FAST, that you heard all of the principals who were presenting here talking about as one of their growth measures. So the MCAs is a proficiency measure, and the FAST is a growth measure. So it's growth to proficiency, growth beyond proficiency. And then the ACT academic measures, because that's also an important piece that we use at the high school. So when we look at those strategies, what are the things that we are doing to meet those outcomes? Using the framework created by the Center for Educational Leadership out of the University of Washington and in partnership with the University of Minnesota. We want to be able to help improve principals' instructional lenses and feedback on their instruction to improve the overall quality of instruction within the system. Well, what does that mean? All principals have either already attended or are attending the Instructional Leadership Academy. It's bringing a common language, a common framework, and a common understanding of when I go into a classroom, can I identify what does high quality instruction look like? What does student engagement look like? I like to think back to the very first ILA that we had where there were 3 principals in that first year, and they were asked, pick something on the topic for improvement that you think that you'll all be in agreement on? And the three principals said, student engagement. We can probably all agree on what high-quality student engagement looks like. And then for the next hour, they talked about how they were all different in their perceptions of student engagement. And I think that's important to acknowledge, to recognize we bring our own lenses and understanding based on our own private and personal experiences into those settings. And then unless we talk about them publicly to align our expectations, we don't become aligned in our expectations. So when you've also heard me talk about making public what was private, when we think about educational systems, a lot of times education historically, when you think about a traditional educational system, teachers could close the door, teach to their students in their homeroom, and it doesn't mean that you open the door and anybody can come in and watch what's happening in the classroom. That's not what we're talking about, and that's not what we're heading towards. But it's about having very public conversations as a PLC, as a BILT, as a district leadership team. How are students doing? And then what are we doing to be responsive as a system to where the students are at through that work? The ILA, the principals, even at the elementary, they're doing their aligned walkthroughs and being able to go into each other's buildings and then talk about what are they working on, and let's hone our alignment through those practices and the feedback. The principals all attended, and all administrators attended the 5D plus the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, and that's a rubric-based outcome. So then they became even more specific. So after ILA, then they went to the 5D plus, and that's really talking about what are those 5 dimensions of teaching and learning that we're going to become better at. We've done a number of presentations on CEL, so I won't go into the depth of that at this time. Collaboratively linking the teams BILT and PLC. They are not siloed. In fact, if we silo them, we will not achieve our results. Earlier you heard me say, I truly believe so heavily on the importance of our PLC work and our BILT work. I believe those are game changers to really improve student learning across the system. We updated our principal goal setting form to focus on site-specific goals. We're kind of in year one. That was very new. We were asking the principals to start tearing apart their data. And you're going to see that tie into some information with MTSS systems later on. Principals focus on the instructional walkthroughs, the building instructional leadership teams established. So you're seeing some of those strategies, those specific things that we're doing. What are the indicators we're going to be using for success? And Paris, this goes back to how are we going to know that we're actually making a difference? That's our site-based annual growth plans. Every building is measuring their growth. When we go through, and the reason that it's so important for us to be able to know at the district level how all of our buildings are doing, it's not ever a got you, it's what do we need to do to support the work of each and every site. And again, the individuals who are going to those meetings, Dr. Anderson, myself, Dana Miller, we have Ginny Nias, we have Solveig Haraday, and even Corey Knutson, our union president, when he's able to join in so he can hear the work that his union members are all engaged in, it's a collective partnership. And then we talk about what are the themes that we're hearing, and if there are individual things that we need to know and recognize about the needs of buildings, that's also our opportunity. It eliminates, the idea of telephone. Well, I've heard that things are going well. I think things are going well. I walk through the building and it seems that everything's under control and that there's wonderful learning taking place. But when we can actually sit and listen to the needs, what are the successes and what are the challenges? There are opportunities for us to eliminate those barriers and become a more flat system, which in a big system is really intentional and really hard. When we think about our time frames, and then going back again, the reason that you had the BILT teams here, or the presentation from the principals on their BILT teams, is to update the board on, let's give an example of our very, very specific work that is happening day in and day out across our buildings to improve instruction. Then the question was, how are our buildings doing? Well, you see those results when Stacy Lackner comes in on the annual updates of all of our growth plans. So you'll see those annual datas, but we see it multiple times a year to be able to do the check on saying, how are our buildings doing? And did we accomplish the goals that we set out to accomplish at the beginning of the year? And if we didn't, what are we going to do about it? And if we did, what's next? It's the continuous cycle of improvement. So it's not taking it and looking at it as a static year. It's being able to finish that year with information and then start looking and taking that data already in June with our principals We have that information. Now, what are they doing to lead into the August Built Institute so when their teams come back, they can become really laser focused on what their building's goals are for the coming school year. It's a continuous cycle. So you're seeing a lot of the things that we're doing. What is the Built Institute annually? That's there every year. And our focus this next year is going to be continuing on the PLC and MTSS frameworks. It's going to be continued refinement. We kind of led with that last year. We had, as you heard, a number of teachers across the system and instructional leaders and principals all went to the PLC Institute that was held here in Minneapolis. We hope to have a number of other individuals going this year to become aligned in their understanding of what are we expecting for high quality PLC work. Here's these examples of where we would be reporting out on it. I'm going to keep going down just a little bit. You're going to see, by the way, notice that these are shaded. I'm going to go back to the very top. And I did this one intentionally so. Shaded goals indicate board-approved priority goals. When we're going to recommend to you that this work becomes system priority work. Where do we want to spend the most amount of our time that we will believe will have some of the greatest impacts? It doesn't mean the other work isn't important. But when we say where are we and what are we saying is the most important work right now to place our greatest focus on and our energies, the MTSS structures and literacy. Implement a culturally responsive approach to reading instruction that's aligned with structured literacy practices, integrating speaking, listening, reading, and writing, which ensures that all students are reading and comprehending at or above grade level at each grade level. It isn't the read well by third grade. As Dana Miller has shared with many of you in the past in many of her presentations, that language is now gone, and it's everybody's at grade level every year. So what are the things that we're doing? So the next time you see this, there'll be more strategies, performance indicators, and timeframes.
One thing I'd like to mention before we move on to the next one is just being able to be at the BUILT meetings. You sensed and saw the enthusiasm from the principals tonight with the work that they're leading in their buildings. And one of the things that has been very rewarding and fun for me to see is being in those meetings and see the teachers excited about reporting on the data and the tremendous amount of growth that they're reporting from their students. So I equate that to solid buy-in. I think they would all say it's really hard work, but you can sense the reward that they're feeling from seeing the growth in their students and being part of that systemic approach and having it, they're knowing that the other buildings are engaged in the same type of work and they have opportunities to connect and talk about things that they're doing in their buildings, and to have that strategic systemic approach across the whole district, I think is incredibly valuable to our students and community.
What I thought was really fun at one of our buildings, the principal was not here this evening, but for their mid-year, their teachers were sharing out time and time again about the risks that they were taking. And they said, you know, because our literacy coach was coming in and encouraging us to do things differently, we were taking risks that we might not have taken before. We were really nervous about what that would look like, but we tried something different and the results were phenomenal. And grade level after grade level after grade level, as they were reporting out their mid-year data and information, had exceptionally high accelerated growth. When we talk about making more than a year's growth in a year's time, it was happening in grade level after grade level, and being able to celebrate those successes and then know what you're doing is working. Continue down that path and continue to refine those practices. Strategic direction number 3, recruit, hire, support, develop, and retain the highest quality staff. We're working on this goal and in particular gathering feedback about the staff experience. There'll be more information coming in the months ahead, but that's going to be really big because when we talk about where is student voice, where is teacher voice, where is district-wide employee voice, and what are they saying about the staff experience for Wayzata Public Schools. Build awareness and capacity to improve health and well-being for our school district community. You're going to see this one. We are going to continue to support the social, emotional, and development needs of students and staff. Again, being able to focus on it's not just students, it's students and staff, but there's a lot of work there and it doesn't happen overnight because we realize the needs, the mental health needs of, it seems like everywhere you go, it's just increased mightily. And how are we responsive to what those are? You'll be able to start seeing that showing up here in this goal. Learn and improve from community engagement and strategic partnerships. Pausing for just a moment to think about this. Many of you who, when you would attend your school board informational sessions, you heard Dr. Anderson say, when you're elected, don't forget, you serve 75,000 residents of our district. Of these, 3,500 are enrolled here in our district. These are our kids, early childhood through transition. It's a lot of kids. And I think you like to, at the back to school PowerPoint, often talk about we're the biggest transportation provider in our district with all of our buses, and we're the biggest school or the biggest restaurant in our area because we serve so many meals to so many kids.
And I think that number is 13,500.
Oh, yeah, there you go. So when we think about that, this is really important. Our community takes pride in being able to say Wayzata Public Schools is an amazing and outstanding system for children. What are we doing to not only maintain that, but elevate that for our community? So everybody who comes in takes pride. So goal number 1, create a strategic community engagement and partnership plan. So there's phase 1, there's research. What is the state of the state? Phase 2, creating that strategic engagement and strategic partnership plan. Phase 3, create a customer service plan and then implement it. So again, the performance indicators, if you notice, it lines up right across. Phase 1, that audit report and recommendations. That's going to be happening in the spring and summer going into this coming now. Spring, this summer. Phase 2, the performance indicator that says it's been done. This goes back to qualitative, quantitative. Did you accomplish it? Did we create the strategic engagement and strategic partnership plan over the winter next school year? Then we think about the customer service plan, again, over the winter and spring next school year, and then implementation as we go into the next year. So this next year is about the development of this to implement it going forward. So being really thoughtful about that information. The lead individuals on that are going to be Amy Parnell, Jenny Ebert, and Wade Phillips. And you'll see that throughout. What you're always going to notice, the individuals who are the leaders are SLT members. The DOP is the SLT level. And even though principals are here and are reporting out on what the work is happening at their buildings, it's aligned to our strategic directions to meet those outcomes. Goal 2, ensure families are identified and are connected to Wayzata Public Schools. We know now today more than ever, there's competition for kids wherever you go, whether it's homeschooling, whether it's charter schools, whether it's private entities. There's somebody who will say, well, if they're not giving it to me here, I'm going to go elsewhere. We want to ensure that our families know that we're the best option for them, and we believe that we can meet the needs of all of them. So what are we doing? So you'll be able to look through, and again, I'm going to give the high flyover. I'm not going to go read this step by step. You'll be able to do that afterwards, and we'll, again, be able to create those feedback loops offline, but making sure that you understand that there's a lot of work that's going to go into that, again, with Jenny, Amy, and Wade. Ensure the effective and efficient use of district resources. The school board and administration will continue to be transparent in sharing information regarding district finances and strategically utilize district resources to support the district mission, vision, and strategic directions where dollars are used in the most impactful way. Enrollment in facilities. This is going to be a huge goal, and we might want to make and consider making this a priority goal over the next year. When we think about enrollment and growth and the buildings, and we've even done some slight shifts in our enrollment and where kids are going. You know that we've approved 2 of our elementary schools to feed into different middle schools. You know that we have taken 2 neighborhoods that we're feeding into already really, really full elementary schools with Northwoods and Greenwood, and they've been shifted to different elementary schools to be able to try to help balance out the size because our continued growth and development with construction in our community. So when we look at that, that's really going to determine what our next steps are. And I think this is where you always add in, we might own land someplace.
We do. As I think the board's all aware, we do own property in Medina, which would be large enough to build both an elementary school and a middle school. So we don't have current plans to do that, but it's available and ready for us if and when we get to that point. So that would be elementary school number 10 and middle school number 4, which I'm pretty sure are part of our future, but it's difficult to know exactly at this point when that might make the most sense to move forward with.
Thus the reason it's enrollment in facilities will be a very big deal over the next 12 months. Goal 2, alignment of budget resources to strategic directions. This is going to need a little bit of work when we talk about how are we actually putting our money so it's not one size fits all and everybody gets the same, because not all schools have the same needs. And how are we meeting unique schools and unique needs differently than we have in the past? And aligning the internal district processes and procedures to improve communication, decision-making, accountability, collaboration, resulting in operational excellence. This is a lot of our internal work, and it's what are we doing the behind the scenes to make sure that we are, as an organization, the most effective and efficient that we can be. So it's, you know, knowing that we've probably gone over between the built presentation and the dot presentation, this really was intended to be for all of you, the opportunity to be able to get this in your hands, to be able to leave here tonight with it in your hands and be able to start reviewing it and start thinking about it. And we're going to continue to keep coming back. And then if there's feedback loops, we probably won't do that here tonight just based on time. But if there are things that you want to be able to share with us, making sure that Dr. Anderson and myself are being communicated with so we can share that with SLT. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Flansburgh, board colleagues. Any questions, comments? Yes.
For feedback, because we are running out of time, should we direct that to you so you can collate and then pass it on then? Is that kind of instructions?
That is a possibility, yes, absolutely. Or would you rather they directly contact you? And you can copy me too, so that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just directly to us and then CC the chair would be fine.
Okay.
One quick question. So the strategic direction 5, right, which is the community engagement and partnership, that's for everybody, right? 75,000 residents. It's not just for the school students and parents.
It's
Is that
thinking
correct?
it's thinking beyond, and I don't want to get too far over our ski tips a little bit with too much information because it's still being refined.
Okay.
But it's thinking about the community as a whole.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that we're going to have a communication plan for 75,000 residents.
Sure.
It means what are we doing strategically differently for our strategic partners that would help improve our system and our district.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I would just say too, one way I've described that in PTA meetings and at liaison meetings is that we do serve 75,000 constituents within the footprint of the school district. And whether or not any individual is a student with us or a parent of a student, we want for the school district to feel like it belongs to all of our residents, because it does. And we want to be responsive to their needs, whether it's through our community education adult learner programs, through our early education programs. So beyond the K-12 experience, we're really pre-K all the way through adult learner, and we want to be responsive to providing programs and services and opportunities for those who live here in our community.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question that might help my board colleagues as well. So I'm trying to understand the timeline. The district operations plan is something that the board will approve?
So by the end of this school year,
Okay.
about May is kind of a timeline. We would like to be able to have a refined enough plan to be able to bring forth, to be able to say to the board, here's our plan that as an administrative team we've collectively put together with feedback from the team. It doesn't mean that we're asking you to write it. Please know that. That's our job to be able to do that with feedback, but we would bring it to you for approval, because then we're saying to the community, we would post that. This is a public document. It would be a public facing document to say, here's the work that we're focusing on right now, and this is our system work.
So if I understand correctly, the ones that are shaded today are the priority goals as of today. But as we go along,
We'd be recommending
some more, right?
And that could change moving
Right. Okay, and then when it comes to for us to approve, then some of those priority goals will become shaded gray as well, some additional ones.
They could.
Okay.
What you wouldn't want is an operational plan where every single goal is shaded gray, saying they're all priority. I'll go back to the work of the builds. When we ask our principals and our teams to narrow their focus and become really hyper-focused and in laser-like intentionality on their work that they want to accomplish, same thing. Doesn't mean other things get ignored, but what we're saying is what's most important right now.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions? Valentina? Okay.
I would like to be transparent, and I would like to pass the question from a community or request. Would you be able to have like an exit, not an interview, exit? So parents, if maybe it'll be innocent as they just moving from state to state, parents finding new jobs. It's typical for American families. Or it might be there is a reason why family is moving. They might be still in the school district, but they're choosing different entity, for example. So would it be nice? It would be nice idea to have exiting, not an interview, feedback, so that we might find out what are we doing wrong, why they're choosing different entity.
And you'll have to forgive me, I think the Welcome Center often collects a lot of that data and information already when students and families choose to leave, because they have to report. And a lot of times it's moving, or they share what their plans are. And a lot of times sometimes it's private and individual parent choice. And sometimes it's, they're frustrated and they might have an intentional choice. I'll go back to masking. That was a very significant driver for many families to choose other options. And if you were to say, why are you leaving? Masking. That was the answer. And it was either I'm not comfortable being in the school, so I'm going to homeschool, or I don't want to wear a mask. I'm going to a private school where they're not forcing me to do so. So a lot of times we do get that information, but that's not something that we usually put online. That's internal information.
I would say too, probably to this point, we've probably been more informal than formal with it. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be possible for our community engagement committee, is that the right name for committee? And our communications team and others to have some conversation about how can we, be sure to hear the voices of our community.
Masking issues, to be honest, are kind of past, hopefully. But if enough families are voicing very distinctive reason why they are leaving, it's probably worth of digging, so that then we might find out why they're doing it and changing it, and then, to be honest, retaining more students. And then we'll have money, and then we don't have to cut budgets.
Yes. All right. Thank you both again. All right. We don't have teaching and learning, human resource services, and finance operations report. Thank you both. Our final agenda item for today is the school board report. And some board members attended the MSBA Leadership Conference in January. I think it was January 11th and 12th. Some of us attended that at the Minneapolis Convention Center. And some of us have offered or volunteered to give a short summary of their experience at the conference. I will begin by sharing what MSBA is and does very quickly, and then the board colleagues will take turns telling us about the events they attended at the leadership conference. So the MSBA, for the listening audience or viewing audience, is the Minnesota School Boards Association. It is a private nonprofit organization founded in 1920, 104 years old. As a leading advocate for public education, it supports, promotes, and strengthens the work of Minnesota school boards. So school boards are members of the organization. 330 plus school districts are members. So almost every school district in the state that has public schools is a member of the MSBA. There are 15 board of directors on the MSBA. I'm one of them, and the directors are divided into 15 districts. I'm Director District 4, representing 15 school districts in the West Metro. Some of them are Minnetonka, Wayzata, Orono, Osseo, Eden Prairie, Edina, Bloomington, and many others. The services provided by MSBA are basically three: board development through training workshops. That is very important for new board members that are onboarding especially. Legal and policy guidance. The policy committee uses their MSBA's policy guidance very, very often. And then the final one is the public education advocacy. They are a very strong advocate of public education. And then on March 18th, we have a day at the Capitol. So board members, please sign up and then show up there. So that's what MSBA is. as I said, the leadership conference was on February 26th, and I'm going to ask my colleagues in order of how I received their response to my request to participate in this. I think it was Sarah Johansson who wrote to me first. So Sarah, you can go.
Thanks. In the interest of time, I'm going to be really brief. And I'm sure someone else will talk about the keynote, so I won't. Two highlights of my experience were, one, I am our school board representative to the State High School League. So I was able to attend with Dr. Anderson the update from the State High School League and just what's happening and things. And so that was helpful. The second that I went to was a presentation that was 5 key questions districts should be asking about math standards, instructions, and assessment. We've heard a lot about our literacy standards and what's being updated. We've also heard a lot about our social studies standards, but we know that our math standards are also going through an update from 2024 to 2028. So a little bit of work for our teaching and learning team, and it was led by a staff member who's a mathematics specialist of academic standards, instruction, and assessment at MDE, as well as Minneapolis school board member and former math teacher. Everything that I did, because this is what our staff do as they do it, and so I've been able to pass all of this information on to teaching and learning and have the conversations. But just for purposes of this presentation, the 5 key questions are, what is our district's definition of math? What math are we teaching? Who is who's on our district math team? What will math look like in 2040? And how do we get support for math? I'm not going to throw out numbers, but we know that the United States is significantly behind in our math teaching and our math achievement compared to all of our peers that are equal to us. And so this really is an important, and I know that there's some conversation happening about that. One of the things also, and we talk a lot about rigor in the work that we do, and when we talk about math rigor, they wanted to remind us that it's a 3-legged stool. There's real-world application, where students identify the appropriate concepts and skills to tackle novel real-world problems. That's not often the 1+2 kind of thing that as math has been traditionally taught. The procedural skill and fluency, right, where students develop efficiency and accuracy in their computations. And then 3, the conceptual understanding, and students build a deep understanding of the how and why of mathematics. We know the changing of our world means that students have a lot more tools available to them, and the ways that we have taught them to think or apply math is just really different. I'll conclude with just a reminder that we got from our thing where they ended to, is that effective teaching of mathematics builds fluency with procedures on a foundation of conceptual understanding, so that students over time become skillful at using procedures of flexibility as they solve both contextual and mathematical problems.
Thank you. I think the next response I got was from Dan Ginestra.
Thanks so much, Milland. Well, it was really a lot of fun being able to attend, for the first time and see everyone and run into some, new friends and, see some old ones. And the highlight for me was being able to honor Cheryl Polzin at the luncheon that we all were able to share together, and having Linda Cohen there, as well as, because at that point, a former board member, was just very, very special. And getting to, take photos and just really commemorate the occasion was really great, and seeing all the different districts we represented in so many ways, and just a really great experience, and I'm eager to go back. So I yield back.
Thank you. Then it was Valentina.
I'll try to be short. To be honest, listening keynote about computer science and AI, opportunity and creativity, first thing I was thinking, I need to come home and tell the kids, you need to learn coding. Second, though, when I saw it, it was, I have to admit, a little bit scary for me as a person from, rural area too. When you see machinery picking up berries, and I was thinking, this means that some people for whom it was the only job available, that job might be not available. So I came out with several kind of, mixed feelings. Kind of, yes, it is something different, something Nowadays, we are competing with AI, and to what degree human brain can compete with it. But at the same time, I am thinking about how, under whose control it is going to be. I mean, it's a big question for me because it's pretty powerful tool, and if it is in wrong hands, it might end up not doing very good neither to our students, neither to us. Second one, I visited with our parents are the ones who are leading it. It's about dyslexia. It was very interesting to listen. In fact, we actually experienced how it feels when you're dyslexic. They were giving us two sides of. We did not realize that we were given different pages. So one side got completely kind of messed up text, another side got not a normal one. So they were asking us to read, and my side had messed up one, and we were sitting. One adult actually said, I was thinking, how are they reading this? I mean, I'm not capable of doing that. It was quite an interesting perspective. And hearing that these parents are pushing it, pushing understanding of dyslexic kids, that science, if we implement science of reading, that can help quite a bit of kids. That was very important to me. And as I said, I myself experienced it, how much it can change your life, how much the outcome can be different for you when you learn to read, and then you pretty much, and nobody can stop you at this point as long as you can get new books. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Paras?
Sure. So overall, the conference was very well organized, again, in line with how typically industry standards work, very nicely done. Before I dive into what my experience was and some of the things that I learned and sort of made notes, overall, I felt, again, as a new board member, I could have been more prepared. Definitely, there were more topics than the allocated time. So I felt going into that conference, I wasn't really prepared. I probably should have spent time with senior board members and do some kind of divide and conquer. I felt within our group, we could have targeted certain areas where each of us could have represented, gathered, information back, be more prepared with questions. Like, I mean, most of the school districts are in similar challenges, right? Finance as an example. Again, it was very informative, but I thought going in, I wasn't prepared. Something maybe we should plan well. The other thing is, again, who do we network with, right? Again, on me, I probably should have asked questions. Hey, who do I need to go and talk, right? We have obviously, we talked about, 40 years of experience, right? And there were a lot of individuals, either board members, superintendents, MSBA individuals with wealth of knowledge. I felt we could have used that time slightly differently with direct questions and sort of get more out of them versus, just let the discussion unfold and we may touch or we may not touch on some of the critical topics. And then the last thing what I felt was we definitely should get WISET as a test case or case study in some of these forums. I'm big on branding. There are several things that we are doing right and good. And I think these are the forums where we should sort of, talk about it. So those were kind of my lessons overall going into the conference or coming out of conference. In terms of specific sessions that I attended, school finance, legislative changes, how it impacts, very informative. They presented at high level how things work. Obviously, there are a lot of layers, but someone like me who is new to school board finance, they hit the right sort of keynotes, and then there were supplementary documentation that they shared with which I thought was really helpful. Second was innovation in education. This was in collaboration with KnowledgeWorks, and we had good mix of superintendents and board members from different school districts. So they created different groups and they talked about, hey, what do you think about this legislation and how it impacts the school district and what your thoughts are? So it was very collaborative session. In fact, Dr. Payne, who was one of the presenters, she actually sent us the follow-ups, and she asked us to attend few other meetings just based on the interest of that group. So I thought that was very productive. We also had Ask MSBA top 10 questions. The key theme that came out of it, I would say the ask from most of the board members in that forum was, hey, MSBA, you need to interpret all the legislations for us and for our community in standard ways. So we all speak the same language. Legislation passes, they talk about billions with B, and that's not how the money propagates in every school district. So before we go and talk about individual school districts and put those nuances, we want you to step in, create that standard messaging, publish it, and we can leverage on top of it. So there was a lot of ask from MSBA to do that upfront due diligence and messaging, if you will, on behalf of all school members. So that I thought was, kind of like the key question or discussion topic that came up. In terms of specific roundtables, growing farm to school, that Mesabi school, they presented. Very key aspect, again, it was interesting to see how they combined the farming curriculum into their program. One thing that they called out was you can start slow and with limited options, but you can expand into any broader scale. It doesn't matter how small or how big your school district is. But again, it wasn't just farm to school. It was a combination of that concept plus the curriculum, because most of the high school students, they were actually working on those farms. So again, they showed how you can work together, how you can introduce those curriculums and then bring that food to the table. So I thought it was really great. Minnesota Solar for School Grants program, it was again in partnership with school superintendent, state representative, and solar consulting company. The concept was great, futuristic. I couldn't quite pinpoint the ROI. It was 3 to 5 years worth of ROI, plus there are restrictions on how much can I use or how much electricity can I use by building, by school district. So personally, I wasn't really sold. I think it's a good concept, something to keep an eye on, but I didn't feel there is immediate ROI, just my read of the story. We talked about enhancing governance with Duluth School District, their journey towards excellence. Again, great networking opportunity, learning from Duluth team. And this is where, again, we could have had, Wayzata in that sort of discussion as, one of our use cases, if you will. Community partnership, and I'm missing out on the school name, but they were in news for all the bad reasons. And how did they turn it around? So they partnered with community. They improved slowly, whether it is equity and so on, literacy, but then they literally turn corners, and then now that school district is one of the great school districts. So again, really great to learn how they sort of, turn the tables, if you will. And last, around technology, again, there were a lot of AI, ChatGPT, including keynote speaker discussions, which obviously very dear to me, given I'm in the technology field. I was extremely disappointed when I looked at Minnesota numbers as compared to North Dakota and South Dakota, even Wisconsin. So again, those numbers I wasn't expecting, but something new to learn. One thing that I came out of that was, and I'm glad, Valentina, you said that, I think that technology is technology. It's going to evolve, whether we like it or not. We have to embrace it. The changes that will come with it, we need to adapt, and we need to leverage the technology. So in all of those discussions, the key message was how you're going to use that technology and be successful. So don't think technology is bad, but then try to work with technology and see how you can utilize it for better outcome. I think that was the consistent theme across all of those, ChatGPT, AI topics. So I think those were all my sessions that I attended.
Thank you, Paras. Sheila, Heidi, you want to? No? Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to just quickly, I had a few workshops that I attended that I wanted to speak about in the interest of time. I'm going to just talk about two of them. One was the keynote session by Hadi Partovi from code.org. And I'm just going to read the statistics that he gave, and that is what is concerning. Minnesota ranks last among all states in offering comp science in high school. Only 21% offer comp science in high school. Only 28% of school districts in Minnesota require basic computer class for graduation. So he was saying that this is something that the Department of Education should be pushing, otherwise we'll be left behind. I did attend the recognition luncheon for our former director, Cheryl Polzin. Everybody else at this table were there also. So congratulations again to Cheryl Polzin for that award on being on the all school state boards in Minnesota. The last one I want to talk about is the Literacy, Dyslexia, and the READ Act by Decoding Dyslexia Minnesota workshop. Valentina, you mentioned the simulation. I don't know if it was at the booth or if were you in that class, in that workshop? Okay, so that's what I was going to mention also. It was just so amazing to see adults that when they speak, you don't realize that they are dyslexic. When they are talking, you don't know whether they are dyslexic. When they start reading is when you know that they have dyslexia. That was something new for me, at least. And then they talked about the cost of doing nothing to help dyslexic students in schools. The cost of doing nothing is to schools, to families. Referrals for special education evaluation increases cost. Increased paras and other SPED teachers and interventionists increases costs. Unnecessary comorbidities, because there are more mental health service needed because of that. So that was basically what I attended. I also attended a couple of other workshops. I don't know if they're worth mentioning right now, but in closing, I want to thank Paras. I think what you mentioned about getting together before the conference, finding out who is going, who is not, and then we all decide, because we have that app given to us like many days before the conference itself. So it's easy for us to decide. Everybody can decide which one we want to go to, and then we make sure there are no redundancies. Like Valentina and I went to the same workshop. We could have gone to a different workshop. I went to the COSBA conference last week. Same problem. There were 3 or 4 workshops. Every time I wanted to go to all 3 or 4, but I could not go to all 4, right? So that is a problem. I think the files, many of the files that the presenters had on the app are still there. So if you want to download those, you can still do that. And that gives a lot of information, even without being present at the presentation or the workshop. So it was, I think, overall a great experience. And as we go more and more, it'll be even better. So thank you so much, everybody. Yes, Dr. Anderson, yes, you have a comment.
I just wanted to offer one comment. So we heard a couple of times about the computer science keynote, and that I thought it was around 20%. So 21%, according to Milland, of the school districts or high schools in the state of Minnesota that offer computer science. And at our high school, I pulled up the computer science page. It looks like we offer 14 computer science classes at Wayzata High School. So we're in that 21%. I just thought I would share that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that finishes our agenda for tonight. It is now 6:23. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for February 26, 2024 is adjourned.